Yes, good morning.
Are we really?
Welcome to Viewpoint, your program of personalities, politicians, and perspectives. Oh, ladies and gentlemen, the listening audience, you had to see this to believe that poor old Jim Ashton trying to get to the console to push all the buttons to come on air, and the cat wouldn't let him on the console board. All right.
I think he's as good at animal husbandry as I am. My dog is like that. He rules the roost, and this darn cat does too.
Well, the cat wasn't about to let him get up there. Oh, welcome to Viewpoint, your program of personalities, politicians, and perspectives. I think we said that. Kudos.
Yes.
Read the first thing in order.
Please.
And it seems to me like it would be appropriate, since our guest this morning has to do with emergency medical response and so forth, is our Logan County EMS folks out there on Hickok Drive, or whatever the name of that road is now. Anyway, it's old 66. Just do a whale of a job for us. Steve Siltman's been up with us before. So I think we just start with a kudo to our medical personnel, and let's just put that under the umbrella of all the emergency responders.
Yes.
That'd be all right with you?
Well, yes, and just really in the recent past, we've become aware of that.
Yes.
That these people are on the job 24/7. Really.
Well, I had a first-hand knowledge of that when a neighbor fell and ultimately left us. But when she fell, boy, they came in a hurry. Mm-hmm. And I stood back and stood out of the way, of course, and I watched the very professional way in which they handled this particular response. Very professional, very steady, very quiet, very unhurried, just knew what they were up to. So let's introduce our guest.
Steve Siltman.
Who can't hear any better than I can without his hearing aids. But
Here we are.
Thank goodness for that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, Steve, you've been with the EMS people since its inception, haven't you?
Pretty much since 74. I think when the coroners, or not the coroners, the funeral homes had it up until I think 71, and then the hospital took over, I think in 71, 72, something like that. But I came in 74.
You have to be an old time to remember this, but there was a time that you mentioned the funeral directors. They passed it around month to month. And 1 month Holland and Berry would do it, the next month Golf Funeral Home would do it, the next month Kerrigan's would do it, then they'd start again. And that's just the way it was. Yeah. And of course there was a
now we have a different level of care.
Fricky, I think Fricky too.
Well, that was Golf Funeral Home.
That was Golf, okay.
I'm sorry. I think I'm going way back.
It was before our time.
You'll have to forgive an old geezer, because sometimes we reminisce a lot, maybe too much.
So there were several people on a committee, just citizens of the county, who got together and thought that this would be a good idea. Maybe you could just mention a couple of those names that you recall.
Well, obviously, Dr. Blom, who just passed away not terribly long ago.
Call him the father of it.
He was the father.
Yes.
And Shirley Edwards, who just passed away last week, I believe it was.
Services were yesterday.
She'll be missed. She
Definitely.
was also one of the big players in getting the ambulance service started in 1999. Many others. I could go through a lot of names. Many of them have passed on since then. But Bob Thomas was a big player.
Corner Bob?
Corner Bob. And he's still on the board, as a matter of fact. But we had a pretty good sized board of directors, and many of them come and gone and so forth. But the biggest players obviously was Dr. Blom, Shirley Edwards, Warren Peters. Warren Peters has also passed on, and Bob Thomas. Those four people signed their names on the original bank note to get us started.
Think about that, folks.
We didn't have any money, and so
just want to think about that. The importance of that. They put their names, which means that they guaranteed the loan. That takes
That's
a special
really
cut.
stepping up to the plate.
Yes,
right there.
that's taking a big bet.
Had we defaulted, they would have been responsible for those bills. And I think, if my memory serves me correctly, the Lincoln State Bank of Lincoln loaned the new fledgling company $200,000 to get started, and it took at least 3 months before we started getting reimbursement in for our services. So we ran through all of that money, plus we had Dr. Blom actually wrote us a check out of his own personal bank account for another $35,000 before we began to see money coming in, and so I owed them all a lot.
That foresight for the community.
Yes.
It's what that enabled the community to have what we have today. It was their foresight and their determination, their dedication.
That's right.
That allowed that.
How many of you actually work? You've got 24/7 to cover, right?
Yes. There are 15 full-time street medics, and then to cover sick, vacation, whatever holidays, things of that nature, we have another, I think it's 18 part-time people that fill in for us. And I think between that and the nurses that we have for our critical care program, I think the number is now 42 that work there. Only 17 full-timers, but all these other people that keep it going.
So you have to have an administrator in that office. There's a lot of balls in the air.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. A critical amount of balancing going on there that got a lot of things going on. Now, quick ask on this episode in which I was involved. I noticed, and we've also noticed that the fire department, they automatically answer when there's a call for you folks.
Yes, sir.
And the protocol on that is?
Well, in the city of Lincoln City Fire Department, which all of their crew, all of their firefighters are also EMT basics,
Certified.
at least. Some are eyes and paramedics and so forth, but that's what they run as the basic life support, and they are what they call first responders. If it's out in the county, then whatever town we go to or near, that fire department answers as the first responder. So we always have not only just 2 medics, but also some basic responders that go with us and help us, accomplish getting the patient stabilized before we move them.
What education is required in order to reach the level you've reached?
Well,
where you're a full-fledged paramedic.
It has been a kind of a thing that's developed over the years. When I went to paramedic school in Springfield, it was the first downstate paramedic course below Chicago. That course lasted 9 months. I believe, in fact, I know for sure, the new medics that are coming in, it depends on how quickly they're moving them through. It'll be at least 1 year, sometimes 2 years program to get them through from a basic. Now, the basic part's 6 months course, but to go from a basic to a paramedic, it's either going to be 1 or 2 years, depending on the course that you take, because they have different speeds for the different courses. It's all the same, but it's just a matter of how much you're getting at once.
And it takes a certain kind of a personality to answer a disaster or a routine ambulance call. You've got to have somebody, excuse me, please, that is a kind of a quiet demeanor, doesn't get excited, thinks things through, and not in a big hurry. Let's get this done. The patient is always in their upper mind first and foremost, and they go about it in a very quiet, professional way.
I've always thought, and I still believe now today, and will continue to believe that with anything, whether if I decide to be a teacher or a doctor or a nurse or a paramedic or a firefighter or a police officer, public service, I think those individuals, it's a calling for them. You have to have a heart for that. Otherwise, because there's so many other professions that pay better and have better hours.
Oh, I'm
terrible
certain
hours.
of that. Oh, yeah, I'm certain of that. You know, when you work, you have to keep the place open 24/7. When you go to bed at 11 o'clock at night and at 11:30 the call comes, and you may not get back to bed.
May not. That's
depending
it
on the
happens.
severity of the case.
You bet.
So it isn't a 9 to 5 operation.
We run last year we ran 4,660 calls. Out of those 4,600 plus, roughly 75% of them are 911 calls or emergencies, and the other 25% are taking patients from the nursing home to the hospital, from the hospital to the nursing home, or from hospital to another hospital. And we do an awful lot of transports from ALMH to Memorial or what other hospital we're going to go to for stabilization and so forth. One of the things that's been big, and I've spoke about this before, is there's been a number of things that have changed over the years, but one of the biggest things is that we have all the equipment and the know-how and the training to be able to actually recognize an acute myocardial infarction, in other words, a heart attack. And in those cases, when it's clear that this is a true acute heart attack or a heart attack that just happened within the last few minutes, we take them directly to a cath lab in Springfield or wherever we're closest to. They do not have that at ALMH, but we take them directly there. It saves heart. It saves lives, because the more time that you waste going from one hospital to another hospital, it changes people's lives. We have many people have had heart attacks and they're still up and walking and doing very well and so forth and functioning very well. And back in the day, you might well have, if you're going to have a heart attack, it was pretty much standard. You're going to be in the hospital for at least a week. You had to be very, very quiet and still and so forth. Now, they get people in and out of there inside of 36 hours, and they're back home again, and they're feeling good.
Now, how do you man each ambulance? When you go on a 911 call, for instance, does there have to be a full-fledged paramedic on every run?
Yes, ma'am. At least one.
At least one. Mm-hmm. And then the extra personnel would be whom?
Well, the law set forth through Illinois, actually across the country, is that if you're going to be an advanced life support service, you must have one paramedic on board. You can have an EMTB with you. This service has always maintained that we very rarely have a paramedic and a B on. We do have that from time to time, but most of the time you're going to have two paramedics. The reason why I think that's important is because when you have a really bad patient, there may be a number of things that need to be done, and one person to do all those things is very, very difficult, and it takes time. Therefore, we feel that it's a better service by having two paramedics there on these calls. And we can't always do it because, frankly, paramedics are getting harder and harder to find. We're short one right now.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Well, is it a fact that, number one, it isn't the greatest pay in the world?
That's right.
And I suspect that's a major issue. Then, of course, we mentioned the hours, the shift thing that you have to, because you have to have that thing open 24/7.
That's right.
Now, when you go on, let's say there's a highway disaster or something, somebody's always in, you have one person is in charge of your crew.
Well, the lead paramedic, or the one who has the most experiences in charge.
And he or she could be would be the one who would make a call if they needed an ambulance, for instance, not a helicopter.
Helicopter, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, I'll have to say, though, it's all split up, because when you have an automobile accident, the police officers are in charge of the traffic and keeping people out of the way. The fire department is in charge of scene safety and ensuring, like taking care of fires or potential fires, and extrication. They have all the equipment to be able to pull roofs off and doors out and so forth. The paramedics their prime purpose there is to care for the patient. So there's a number of, I'm in charge, there's probably 3 people in charge of a situation, but they're in charge of their little section.
But you have to have that. You can't all be running around like chickens in the barnyard, bumping into one another. So that sounds like it's a pretty efficient system.
It is, and Logan County is so fortunate, because being in this service, I know what other counties have and what they deal with and so forth. And because of the fact that we have the type of service we have, and the police officers and the firefighters and the paramedics, we all respect one another's jobs and are very, very respectful of their area. That is not the case everywhere. There's some places where the firefighters don't want to have anything to do with the medics don't want to have anything to do with firefighters. It can be really kind of a
That'd
mess.
be really efficient, wouldn't it?
Well, speaking of respect, we have somebody that we respect a great deal up here at WLCN. It's called our sponsors. And Mr. Rice is now going to take a couple of seconds to recognize them. And then we're going to come back. I'm going to put a challenge out for somebody out there, so stand ready for this challenge. Go right ahead, James. Right back live in the studios here, WLCN, Viewpoint, of course, 8:15 and 9 o'clock each Wednesday morning. Our guest this morning, Mr. Steve Siltman, the chief of all chiefs out there at the Logan County Medical Service, a group that just does a tremendous job for this county.
Thank you.
We don't, until the emergency arises, we just take them as, well, they're out there. Well, let me tell you, if you have an emergency in your family or on the highway or something, they're more than just out there. They're right there for us. Now, 648-5510. Somebody might or should have a question or comment for Steve Siltman. And here's my challenge. Logan County Lincoln Rotary Club is for having a little fundraiser. And we have them selling tickets to a chicken dinner carryout that you can get at the American Legion. And the first caller with a question and or comment for Mr. Siltman, I'll give him a couple of tickets. Get your pen ready. The phone's going to ring off the hook, Chip. 50% of our callers are going to call in. One of our 2 callers, Shirley, ought to call in. Now, we're talking about staffing, and I'd asked Steve off air about how they go about filling a vacancy. It's not an easy thing. And there again, money comes into what would an average, I'm going to tell any secrets about a school, but what would an average paramedic take home?
Well, I equate this with benefits. Our benefit package is extremely good. Good. Extremely good. And so that really needs to play in the position. But as far as gross pay is concerned, somebody walking in the door, you're looking at 32 probably. Now that sounds like a lot of money, because
well, it really isn't.
But back today, in today's
not today.
What does it cost for a car? $20 some $1,000.
But you have how many people that work for you, full or part time?
17 full time, and then of course all these part timers, including our CCT program, which I think there's 4 nurses right now, I think is right, and then 3 paramedics are critical care trained, specifically trained for that.
Well, how do you keep your head above water? The calls that you make, do they make you self-supporting?
Pretty much, for the most part. Now, the county has an ambulance tax levy. It's about 5 cents per $100 of property evaluation, and so it generates $258,000 a year. That goes to the ambulance service to offset our losses. I can tell you that the factor that we go by is that for every dollar that we charge, we receive 50 cents back. And so obviously when you're looking at a 50% write-off and a $2 million budget, operating budget, and you know, a lot of times the people that have, you know, the ability to pay with insurance premiums and so forth, they look at that and go, oh my goodness, how could it be $1,000 or $1,200? Well, the fact of the matter is if we could get all the money that we charge for, we probably only have to charge about $600 per call.
Oh, yes, I'm sure there's always that.
How many ladies do you have on your staff, sir?
Many. We have one woman who is Crystal Bale, is our A shift crew manager. We have, I think, 7 or 8 women that work for us. We've always, in fact, actually Logan County was one of the first to really jump into the female area, because I can remember when we started out, there weren't any females working in this business, but now it's getting very prominent for women to get involved in it, and they do a fabulous job. There is no difference in the care whatsoever. In some cases, it's actually even good to have women on many calls, because it helps calm women when they're having a problem and so forth. If you have a woman paramedic, they feel calmer, and so it's great. I mean, I have no problem. We could have all of them being women. It wouldn't make any difference to me.
Probably kids are reassured when there's a woman too,
kids,
because they deal with the mom, generally speaking, more than the dad.
Now, if there's a terrible wreck here at Atlanta, Illinois, and then somebody may have to make a determination to bring in a helicopter, what's that going to cost?
Helicopters are very, very expensive. The way I understand it is you're looking at a minimum $15,000.
Ouch.
And they can run
That's
up
just
to
openers.
$25,000, $30,000 for a transport. I don't know the logistics behind air transport. We don't call them unless we know we need them, period.
Yeah.
But when they're needed, they're needed.
Where would they come from?
If it's on the north side of the county, we generally call Peoria Life Flight, and if it's on the southern part of the county, we call Saints Flight out of they're stationed at St. John's Hospital.
What kind of response time are we talking about?
Well, if they can get in the air, and when I say if, there's not a lot of them, and so they might be busy on another call.
Yeah.
So we have to call another agency. The other thing is weather has an awful lot to do with it. If the weather's terrible, sometimes they can't get in the air safely.
Yeah.
But most of the time they can get in the air and get to us within 15 minutes.
That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they're pretty fast.
Yes, it is.
They're pretty fast. I think the ones they have in Peoria are called jet helicopters. They're Sikorsky. They're very fast helicopters.
When you get a call, what kind of information can you get so that you have some idea what you're going out there to find?
That was a great question. There are so many components to public service, and one of the biggest components is our 911 service. We have a fantastic 911 service. Those people are trained specifically to take calls from people, get with the correct information, keep them on the line as long as they can, and they also can give them some general instructions on, let's say, if they, do you know CPR? No. Well, here's some some general instructions to get started on this and so forth. So there's a lot of things that people can do, or open an airway. Even if you're untrained, they can kind of give you a quick training over the phone and so forth. These guys and gals do some terrific work there.
Go right ahead, Mrs. Busby. I was looking for something here.
Did you find it?
Oh, I will. Sometime between now and the time
You've got a wealth of stuff going there. Yeah. Well, it's important that you know not only where you're going, but what you're going to run into when you get there, surely.
Yes, and we do get a pretty good idea what we're going to get before we get there. They'll page us on the pages, say we had a 911 call at such and such address. We have a, let's say, 56-year-old male patient who's having chest pain with a cardiac history. That's generally the kind of thing that we will get, and so we were already somewhat mentally prepared for what we're going to get. It doesn't always work. Sometimes we get surprised, but
in the event that you're going to need to call the helicopter people, can you determine that just by talking with the 911 representative that you have on the phone?
Sometimes for the most part, what we found is the most efficient way is to the medics get there as quickly as they can, assess the situation, see what we've got, and then call the dispatch and say we need a helicopter out here, and then they go ahead and dispatch one. That sounds like it wastes time, but the problem is you can't be having a helicopter come up every doggone time they get a call. Therefore, that's the most efficient way that we could come up with that would work, and it seems to work pretty well.
Good.
It goes without saying, of course, that your paramedics don't just sit around and read magazines.
No.
There's every day there's equipment to work on, clean, make sure everything is working fine, and also I'm certain that you have classes and seminars all the time.
All the time.
Training.
We have internal training every month. On the third Thursday of every month, we have internal training, and we have a training officer that's certified as a teacher. And then we also, because we belong to the Memorial Health System, Memorial provides us with a lot of training as well. So, do
they oftentimes come to you?
They do sometimes. They do at times, but the big ones, the all evening or all day things, we have to go down there for. And they have a big, huge training center there now. It's just amazing. You would be amazed at what they've got. The one floor in their training center that has an ambulance inside the building.
Oh my!
And they can replicate loading and unloading a patient. Yeah. All kinds. It's pretty amazing.
Now, to whom would you report? Let's use the word higher authority, for instance, just for want of a better terminology, as far as records and the way you operate and so forth. Do you have an oversight group or?
Two. We belong to the Memorial Health System, and the Memorial Health System EMS people are over us and ensure that we have all of our protocols in place and that we know our protocols. And then the Illinois Department of Public Health is an entity that we have to pass all of our vehicles every year. They come to us and they go through all of our equipment and make sure that everything is up to snuff. And if so, they give us a clean bill of health on each ambulance, and if it is not, then they say this has got to be fixed or whatever, but I have never had in all these years them say, no, you're not passing this vehicle. They've always passed us.
So you must keep tabs on every vehicle then every day.
We do. Yeah.
648-5510. Somebody might be hungry out there, and they get a couple of ducats for the rotary chicken carry out, if you like. 648-5510. Our guest this morning, of course, as you've been paying attention, certainly you have, It'd be terrible if they hadn't paid attention, Judy K. Mr. Steve Siltman, longtime associate of Logan County and leader of our Logan County Emergency Services. Steve, a hidden cost, not to you certainly, but to the community, would be the insurance factor. It must be a huge cost to cover contingencies.
Oh my goodness. An organization such as ours, we must have workman's compensation. We must have health insurance for employees. Well, we don't have to have it, but we have health insurance for employees. And we have short-term disability. We have many different insurances, and we spend an exorbitant amount of money to keep all these things insured. An exorbitant amount of money. Mm-hmm. People would be, oh, really? That much? Yeah. It takes a lot of money.
Well, but you're dealing with life and death situations right along. You know, they have to feed that into the equation.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's terribly expensive.
Yeah, we spend about $65,000 a year just on diesel fuel. That's just one of hundreds of different
really?
things. Yeah, because we spend a lot of time on the highway and transporting people. So some calls we go on, there are occasions when we have to go to St. Louis, we'll have to go to Chicago, we have to, we spend a lot of time on the road.
Now, how... if you have to run to Memorial or St. John's in Springfield, how quickly can you get down there reasonably? And there's a speed factor that has to be considered.
I think reasonably you're only looking at 25, 30 minutes. I mean, point to point. It depends on where you start out at. But like from the hospital to hospital, you're looking at 25, 30 minutes.
Go ahead, honey.
Well, do you have to take how many people then when you go to one of these places? How many staff are on the...
Well, you have a driver and you have a paramedic.
One would hope they have a driver.
Yeah, right.
That's always helpful.
Driver and then a paramedic in the back. And if it's a critical care patient, you have to have a critical care paramedic and a critical care nurse and a driver. So depending on the type of call it is.
With the number of calls you get over the course of a year, you must get one every day.
Just about, yeah. Sometimes multiple times a day, and then we have days when there's not that much going on. But I mean, there are many days when it's not unusual for us 25 calls in a day. Not unusual at all.
And let's equate that just a minute to the severity of the need for the call. Oftentimes, well, I better rephrase that. Sometimes you get there and there's been no need for you to be there at all.
That's correct. Mm-hmm. It happens. You bet.
Which is an expense.
Well, yes, exactly. For everybody, for the fire department, for everybody.
But the thing is, the person who called you is probably panic-stricken, and so you really can't throw them out to the wolves.
No, and really the bulk of calls that fall into that category are the advent of cell phones. Somebody will see somebody drive off the road or be sitting on the side of the road, and maybe they might even be sleeping, and somebody calls 911 and says, I think there's somebody stuck in this car at this point. Well, everybody goes out to check them, and they're like, I'm just taking a snooze,
Yeah.
And so those kinds of things happen.
Now, how do you offset the cost for a call like that?
Well, it all has to be figured into the equation. I mean, and unfortunately, that's the only way we can do it is to take a look at all of our calls, all of our expenses, and then come up with, our goal is not to make money. We're healthy. We're not going anywhere. Financially, we're healthy, but we're not. Our goal is not to make money. Our goal is to balance our budget.
Have you ever birthed any babies, Steve?
Yes, ma'am. I sure have. Absolutely. Yeah.
How many babies have you brought into the world?
I've been involved in 2. And frankly, both of them are grown and adults now. So, but some of the other medics have on occasion will come across one.
That'd be a nice side to a call, wouldn't it?
have two babies run around named Steve. Tell me about the severity of cases. Any in particular that stand out in your memory that you have personally been involved with, Mr. Siltman?
I would have to say, and I can't really get into specifics, but the G murders were happened to be on that day, and that one sticks in my brain a lot.
I was not even thinking of that factor. I was thinking of physical damage, like wrecks and so forth.
Oh yeah.
I forgot about those tragedies.
Yeah, they're all tragic when somebody loses their life.
Mm-hmm. Oh gosh, yes.
How do you handle a patient who becomes hysterical? And I presume that will happen from time to time.
Well, if we can't talk them down, then, and if they're combative, we're forced into, putting sheets over them and tying down to the cot so that they don't hurt somebody or whatever, hurt themselves. But fortunately, that doesn't happen very often. Most of the time, we can calm people down pretty good. Mm-hmm. We're used to it, So.
If they're inebriated, that probably lends a whole other
or high
thing. Yeah. Oh, well, there's that.
Yeah. Speaking of that, do you get a lot of calls with drug problems, Steve?
Yes, sir. We sure do. Have
you seen an up spike in that?
Yes. We have. We give a lot of Narcan, which is a drug that reverses narcotic overdoses. We give a lot of it. And the police department carries it now, and so does the fire department. All of them carrying that anymore because you can't hurt anybody by giving it. It's a good diagnostic tool. Sometimes we'll give Narcan, it's like it didn't do anything, so there must be something else going on here. But most of the time, Narcan works pretty good.
So this opioid crisis isn't just a bunch of hooey, huh?
No, it's real. It's very real. And there's so many different things out there that they got not only the manufactured drugs, but then you got the synthetic drugs and all the things that go along with that. It's really a rampant problem.
Will people tell you what they took, or don't they even know?
Very rarely.
Yeah.
Very rarely. Most of the time we don't know what at times they've told us, but most of the time they're not going to come up with in fact a lot of times when we reverse their high, they're mad at us because
they were in a happy place.
Yeah, they were in a place where they wanted to be. But unfortunately, sometimes they take too much, and they can stop breathing. They're out. They don't know what's going on, and they don't realize how dangerous it is. Apparently,
is the cause of death the breathing always?
Yeah, I mean it's kind of like like when you go into surgery, they give you drugs and they intubate you, so they breathe for you.
Yes.
Those drugs put you in a state where you don't even know to breathe. Well, that happens with some of these drugs. If they overdose, they just don't know to breathe, and they just stop breathing, and it kills them.
Steve, what does it cost to put an ambulance on the street?
Oh man. I know for the most part, each of our newer ambulances are running somewhere between $180,000 and $200,000 a piece. Then we've got another.
That's before equipping.
Yeah, we got another $100,000 worth of equipment going in. So you got about $250,000 rolling around, and we have 5 of them. So we got $1.25 million just in vehicles.
Now, wherein comes your supplies for how do you restock what you need? Various places around the country or state?
Well, reusable supplies and medication we get from the hospital. And whenever we use a medication, then we go into the hospital, and they record that, and then they can charge for the medication because ambulance service cannot itemize. It's a law. We can only charge a base rate and a mileage rate and for oxygen, a couple other things. So if we're an extension of the emergency room, they can charge for what we give in the field. And so that works well on that end of it. But the other supplies are figured into our base rate, and so.
Who in the world decided that was a good way to run things?
Yeah, I don't know. not me.
Well, look, that's laughable. Just go down to the Capitol building and see who inhabits there.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Some of them are very solid. Some of them are pretty squirrely.
Yeah.
We're lucky to have pretty solid representation right here in this community. Others, not so much.
Not so much, no.
As you close, Steve, is there anything you'd like to ask or comment about?
Well, I'd like to say, well, first of all, thanks for having me. You guys have been very kind to me over the years. I think I've done 3 or 4 of these shows, and I appreciate that. And I'd like to thank the public for, we get an awful lot of positive feedback from the public. And we get very, very few complaints, and I think that's tremendous. I think it's because people understand what we're doing, and they're for us. They're not against us. Mm-hmm. And so I appreciate the public.
Well, if you saved my life, it'd be pretty stupid of me to be grumpy at you.
Well, it's always a joy to have Steve Siltman with us. He represents certainly not a little known. We see him on the street all the time, sometimes too often, but a service to our community that is just invaluable, and we'd certainly be bereft without those services, Logan County Emergency Services. They'll be glad to visit with you. If you have any personal questions, don't hesitate to go out there and talk to him. He's a pretty busy guy, but he'd find time to be courteous to you. He's always been that way to me.
He's just a nice man.
That's because I tell him his porch looks so nice. I don't want to be facetious here. Closing comment that I found that would apply not only to paramedics, but any and all in the medical field. He said, "You are not studying for an exam. You are studying for the day when you are the only person between the patient and the grave." Thank you, Steve Siltman, very much.